You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob.
Welcome to Inside the Village with Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief here at Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Welcome back to the show, pal. It's Blue Monday. How are you feeling?
That's what I hear from reading the headlines today. Blue Monday, I guess, is supposed to be the most depressing day of the year. It's interesting that we're both wearing blue today.
It is, and I didn't even know about this Blue Monday phenomenon until somebody pointed it out to me, and I don't know, I don't feel any more depressed today than I did yesterday.
I was going to say the opposite because you're usually so happy that you can't possibly feel blue, but I guess they say that because the holidays have just finished, people's Christmas bills are racking up, and the reality that they're back for the grind of work kind of all come together on this Monday in January. Who knew?
All right. Who knew? All right, the first word to Frisco. Out of Barrie, charges have been laid now against a Concord, Ontario construction company following just an absolute terrible tragedy last August.
Yeah, everybody remembers this story with 6 young people from Barrie were killed in a car crash, apparently driving through what turned out to be a construction site. Our team at Barrie today has done a phenomenal job covering this very difficult story. A lot of emotion, a lot of tragedy going on here, but they're covering it in the way local journalists should. And this week came news that the police have laid 6 charges, six counts of criminal negligence causing death against the company, Condrain Company 1983 Limited. One of the biggest water and sewer companies in Ontario, if not Canada. They were doing the construction there. What's interesting about this is it's the company that's been charged with these offenses. It's very rare. Usually an individual working at a company, in the case of that, would be charged. At the moment, the police investigation is still active. That could change tomorrow. They might lay charges against somebody. But for now, it's the company, which kind of raises the question of, well, what happens if a company's convicted of this crime? And Sean Gibson over at Barrie Today wrote a great piece explaining how this worked, talked to some experts about how this works. And essentially, the criminal code says that if an individual is convicted of this, it's the maximum penalty of life imprisonment for a person in the case of criminal negligence causing death. But in the case of an organization, it's a fine at the discretion of the court.
Right.
So who knows how much a fine would be worth? 6 people lost their lives. So just one of those stories that we'll definitely be continuing to follow in the months to come.
Let's revisit bail reform for a moment, if we can. Last week we had defense lawyer Alison Craig from Toronto on the program to give us her thoughts and insights. Now, following that appearance on Inside the Village, the premiers across the country are now rallying together and having conversations with the Prime Minister about doing something.
For sure. And obviously, the fact that we did this on our program was probably the thing that pushed them over the edge to write the letter to the Prime Minister.
It precipitated the whole thing.
For sure.
Absolutely.
But the 13 premiers wrote a letter to the PM late last week, urging him to take immediate action, to take a look at the bail system in Canada and then see what needs to be fixed so that these kind of things don't happen again. It's interesting that this is still a major story for people, a major consideration. And, I urge people to go back and listen to Alison. Her comments last week was really a good inside look as someone who's actually been in a lot of bail hearings and understand how the system works and also understands what some of the systemic problems were long before this case. So if we're going to have a discussion about bail reform, you kind of have to understand all the different sides.
Absolutely. And finally, I think it goes without saying we should be giving a shout out to Pelham. Pelham today, I'll tell you, that community has really embraced their new local news website.
I have to say, we mentioned on the last show, but this is our latest news site is in Pelham and Niagara region, replacing a great weekly local newspaper called The Voice. And Dave Burkett, who was the editor there, is now working with us, and it's now an online site run by Village Media. And you can just tell that the people of Pelham loved that paper and are looking for local news. The reaction has been amazing. I think in the first week, almost 60,000 page views on the site.
Wow.
Not that we judge things by page views or clicks or anything like that, but the fact that there's that kind of engagement, that there's that kind of people, that there's that many people looking for local news in their community, it was just amazing. A lot of the credit goes to Dave and all the work he's put in to prepare for this. But they have some great reporters on the ground, some really interesting columnists. I've read their stuff over the weekend. So if you live in Niagara region or if you live anywhere and you haven't checked out Pelham today, it's really worth it. It's quite a great site full of great local journalism. All
right, good stuff. Today on the program, I think one term that we're hearing an awful lot about as of late is cybersecurity. And we're going to be speaking with Sai Huda, who's a cybersecurity expert and author of a best-selling novel, but it really seems to be getting out of hand.
Yeah, it seems like every day there's a new headline about cyber attacks, whether the Hospital for Sick Children, the LCBO was hacked, the University Health Network, and of course, where we're sitting here in Sault Ste. Marie, the Huron-Superior Catholic District School Board had a pretty severe ransomware attack right before the holidays, which they're still kind of working their way out of. So lots to talk about with Sai.
All right, it's going to be a good show. Sai Huda joins us next when Inside the Village returns right after this.
From newsmakers to celebrities to other prominent guests, you'll find them all on Village Media's new interview series, Up Close and Personal. Join host Scott Sexsmith as he goes one-on-one with well-known Canadians to hear their story. Up Close and Personal. Look for it on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Welcome back to Inside the Village. I'm Scott Sexsmith alongside Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media. We are pleased to be joined on the program now by Sai Huda. Sai is a cybersecurity expert and author of the best-selling book, Next Level Cybersecurity. Sai, welcome to Inside the Village. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Sai, I'd like to start with what may not be a simple question, but if you could maybe dumb it down for guys like Frisco and I and explain in layman's terms for our audience, what is a cybersecurity expert?
It's someone that supposedly knows a lot about cyber attacks. No, seriously, it's someone that is passionate about protecting businesses and individuals from the bad guys. Mm-hmm. We're all being attacked as individuals and organizations because we're all digital. We use email, we use, mobile phones, we have internet access at home, businesses have websites, we're all digital. So because the digital component, we're potential targets. So, someone like me sees this and has devoted their life to protecting folks, and especially the little guy from the bad guy.
Mm-hmm. So do you work with a lot of different companies in your career, or who do you typically work with?
Yes. So CyberCatch primarily serves small and medium organizations in North America, so U.S. and Canada. And these are organizations that are for-profit or non-profit that are less than 500 employees. Mm-hmm. We have some larger organizations that we serve, but our primary target market is the little guy. These are the folks, they could be anywhere from, a two-person business to 50, 100, 300 employee organization, for profit or nonprofit. And they need help because they're on the digital bandwagon trying to serve their constituents or their customers, but they're potential targets.
Mm-hmm. We can get into that because I think a lot of the smaller guys maybe don't give a lot of thought to cybersecurity. I think that's probably fair to say, and it's not something at the top of their mind, especially if you're a smaller company running a business like that. But I guess let's get to the biggest question first. We're seeing headlines every day. We've seen headlines for years, but especially the last few weeks, it feels like there's cyber attacks every day. We've seen the Hospital for Sick Children victim of a ransomware attack, the University Health Network, the LCBO went down, and even close to home, we're in Sault Ste. Marie right now, the Huron-Superior Catholic District School Board here was hit with a major ransomware attack by a pretty notorious group right before Christmas, forcing them to let the kids out, and they had to deal with that. The obvious question is why? Are we seeing more of it lately, and why?
Yes, absolutely. The attacks are increasing quite significantly. And it's nobody's immune. So you mentioned some of these organizations, but it's a wide range. It's colleges, it's mining companies, it's, as you mentioned, hospitals, healthcare. So nobody's immune. And the reasoning is, as I mentioned earlier, is that everybody is digital. So everybody uses email. I mean, who do we know that doesn't use email? Everybody, as far as an organization, has a website. I mean, who do we know doesn't have a website? So just because of those two factors, they can be attacked from the internet, from thousands of miles away. So the bad guys, they could be a criminal gang who's in there for the money, or it could be a sponsored group by a foreign, government, perhaps, hostile nation like China, or it could be just a lone wolf. So anybody who has access to the internet, who knows quite a bit about the way the web works, who knows about codes, can use unfortunately, their knowledge in a bad way. Those are the dark, side, if you will. So that's why these criminal gangs and others have realized that there's a lot of potential victims out there, and they're ramping it up. because the defense is weak, in organizations, certainly in Canada.
Sai, you mentioned the bad guys. What exactly are the bad guys after?
Great question. So I'm glad you asked. They're after two things. One is data. And the data could be customers' data, could be patients' data, could be students' data, information about individuals that are part of that organization, directly or indirectly. So everybody's got data. And the data involves not only name, address, but really passwords. That's really valuable. Also, obviously, other information like personal information, driver's license, and social services number, et cetera, et cetera. That data can then be used to commit additional attacks. So imagine getting hold of folks' passwords. If these folks are not savvy and really diligent, and they're using that password at different sites, well, bingo, that password then can be used to start to get into other sites that they may be having access to, bank accounts, and others. Or the data could be sold on the dark web. That data has a lot of value on the dark web for other bad guys to use. So the data is really key. The other part is the impact. And so what they want to do is they not only want to steal data, but also they want to install ransomware. And ransomware is basically malware that encrypts data, file systems, so you can't operate. And now what they want to do is they want to say, hey, guess what? You want to unlock everything? Pay us some money. And so it's a double dipping, if you will, because now I've got your data, but I also locked you out. So if you don't pay me, then I'll leak your data and coerce you to pay me. So those are the two things that these guys are after. And generally, it's monetary is a primary gain or motive. But then, as I mentioned, it could be something even more strategic or national security if they're sponsored by a foreign government who not only wants the data, but also wants something of even more value like IP, product designs, code, a whole host of other things that they can use to get a competitive advantage as a nation.
Sai, we'll explore ransomware in a moment. I just want to go back to a point that you brought up about passwords. We all have them. We all use them. We've all heard the horror stories of the individual that still uses 1, 2, 3, 4 because it's easy. And just for the record, nobody should use 1, 2, 3, 4. But Sai, what should people use? What do you recommend from a character number, uppercase, lowercase? What is the best thing that we should all be doing?
Yes, absolutely. So certainly you've got to use passwords that are not easily guessable. And so, do not use those simple ones or even like your pet name or somebody that's, in your family. Those are easily going to be guessed. So it's got to be usually passphrases. So use something that's unique to you, but it's like a phrase. And it's got, combination numbers or words. So that's a good best practice is to use a little bit of a longer passphrase that's unique to you. But also using, password managers. So there's some really good products out there. Some are free, some cost a little bit, but it's worth it, where you're using, essentially passwords that are randomized. And you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to remember it. That's what that technology does. So those are the two ways. But the other thing really is to use multi-factor authentication, frankly. So don't just use a username and password because those are easily still breakable and guessable with the password cracker. So multi-factor authentication is where, in addition to username and password, you're going to get unique one-time passcode to your mobile phone, and hopefully it's not an SMS text, But if it is, that's still better than nothing. But ideally would be a multi-factor authentication application. There's Google and Microsoft that provides free ones. So if you use those, then that will give you a one-time passcode to be used just for that access. And so that now blocks that attacker. Because if the attacker has your username and password, they're going to not have your one-time unique passcode. You only will have that. So that's where it becomes more difficult for the attacker.
Mm-hmm. Just back to ransomware. Basically, these groups will go in and get into a system and encrypt their data and ask for a certain amount of money to get it back. Does it range into the millions that some of these groups will ask for?
Yes, it does. Generally, it's anywhere from 2 million to 10 million Bitcoins.
Wow.
So pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
And they know the impact, right? So imagine as an organization, you're locked out for days, weeks, maybe even a month. I mean, what would that do to your organization? So you're going to be scurrying, trying to figure out, geez, can we get it back up? Do we have backups? And now these ransomware have been designed to be pretty smart. So what they'll look for are not only the original files, but also backup files. So anything with .bak, anything that might indicate it's a backup file. So a bad idea is to have backup files on the same system. So you really got to have backup files that are offline, not accessible by the ransomware. But it's going to look for that. And really, it's impact. It's like they want to cause you harm, and they want you to go, okay, gosh, I'll pay you the Bitcoin and unencrypt because it's worth it. But the sad thing about it is they're untrustworthy. And so, law enforcement will generally recommend that you don't pay the ransomware. So, then you're in a catch-22. What do? Do you try to survive? And if you pay the ransomware, will they really give you the keys? Generally they do, but a lot of times they don't. They just walk away. They're the bad guys. Yeah. They're untrustworthy. How do you know they're going to give you the keys? They may or may not. It's up to them. The other part is they'll usually put in like a back door. And so even if you pay the ransom and they unlock it, you've got to really do a forensic exam at this point, because otherwise you don't know if they've left in some code there that they're going to come back in a month or 3 months or 6 months, and all of a sudden, it's deja vu again, and it's happening. It's happening where they're coming back in again.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I just want to use the local example we have. I don't know if you've read at all about the attack here in the Sault, the Huron-Superior Catholic District School Board. Our reporters here at Sault today obtained the ransom note that kind of spit out of all the photocopiers there and on the computers. It was Royal Ransomware, which is a pretty notorious group. Can you talk about that first, Sai? Who are they? What do they do?
Yeah, they're one of several groups out there. Some are affiliated, sort of in the Russian-speaking countries. And generally, that's where the bulk of these ransomware gangs are. Either they're located in Russia or, in one of those friendly Russian countries, like Belarus, for example. Or they're located in different parts of the world, but they generally have sort of that, ethnic background, Russian-speaking. And generally, they are all about money. So they're about making money, and they found this to be a really easy way to do that. So that's that. But some of them are in other countries too. Iran has some ransomware gangs. North Korea also is pretty notorious for having government-sponsored ransomware gangs. And then China also has that also. So those are the big four, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. Those are the big four. And they're some of them are sponsored, affiliated, and some of them are independent. And they're just going after organizations and individuals.
Sai, you mentioned Russia. How much of this is possibly funding the war in Ukraine?
Yes, some of that is, in fact, doing that. And so, that's where, the Putin government kind of looks the other way because, it's essentially bringing in money back into their economy, directly or indirectly. So that's happening. Also, some of these gangs have been really tasked by the Russian government to attack Ukrainian resources or parties affiliated with the Ukraine. So, American organizations or Canadian organizations that are supporting Ukraine are high target and at risk, and it's happening. They're being attacked also. So it's a vicious cycle, if you will. But in Canada, what we have to do is we have to really understand that we're a digital nation. People and organizations are being attacked left and right, and we've got to really take it to the next level as a team.
So if you're that school board in the Sault and they phone you and your company after this ransomware attack, what's your first course of action? Do you assess the situation? What's your advice to them in those first few hours?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is to try to see if you can minimize the damage. So if you already got the ransom note, it's late. They've already got your data. They've already infected ransomware. So the key at that point is to see how widespread is it, and what have they supposedly exfiltrated. What kind of data? How long is the data for? And schools are a ripe target because they have a lot of data, not only current, but from prior years, right? They've had students go through those schools for years. They've got former employees. They've got faculty that have gone through. So, who is impacted? Is it just student data, or is it student and faculty? So those are the kind of things you've got to quickly do and assess. Is this it, or is it still spreading? But then you've got to really figure out what do we do now? We've got to inform everybody who's impacted. help them get monitoring, because now it could be credit that might be impacted. The data could be sold. They may have identity theft committed against them. That is a big concern. Could be students, could be faculty, could be staff. So that's a big concern. The other concern is the staff, especially IT staff. Have their credentials been stolen, and could that be used again? So you've got to reset passwords. You've got to add in some defenses, and then you've got to step back and really examine, how did this happen? Where were the weak links? And what can we do to prevent this from happening again? Because if we don't take it seriously now, it's going to happen again. In a few months, they'll come back because they know we have a weak defense.
Would you recommend that an organization like that pay a ransom?
No. I mean, paying ransom is like the last resort. So really, it's about seeing if you can get back up quickly. So that's the first part. So hopefully the backups are offline, might take a couple of days, and you can retrieve that and get going. And then you take some measures like resetting everybody's passwords, putting in multi-factor authentication, getting credit monitoring to the folks whose data might be at risk. Those are the things you do, and then do a forensic exam to prevent. But paying ransom does not make sure that they're going to give you the keys. They might just laugh and walk away. Then what do you do? Giving them money and they haven't done anything for you. So it's like the last resort. Some schools haven't unfortunately done that, but really, ideally, it's not to get in this situation, right? So that's why we created the National Cybersecurity Standard in Canada.
Go ahead if you want to follow up on that.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because basically their systems are back up and running for the most part. Their website is back. The kids are back in school. Are there other ways you can get this data back without paying a ransom? It's hard to know what happened behind closed doors here, but what could have happened?
Yeah, so a lot of times you start negotiating with the bad guys, right? So they may want 2 million Bitcoins. They may want it now. And so, there's some schools and others who will try to negotiate with them and say, look, we're a nonprofit. We can't pay that, but we need this. You're harming. Sometimes, they'll bring it down to a smaller amount, and then they'll give you the keys. A lot of times they don't, and so that's a risk. But really, it's about now making sure that further harm isn't committed. So like I was saying, you got to size up who's impacted. And, the kids especially, some of them might not see the impact until a year from now, 2 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, when they, go to college and their credit's ruined, or, their identity has been stolen, or their parents' identity has been stolen. So there's a lot of ramifications. So you have to assess, you have to take action. But really the key is not to get in that situation. You got to have a good defense. That's why in Canada, we created what's called CAN-CIC 104, National Cybersecurity Standard for Small and Medium Organizations. I had the honor and privilege of helping author it. And it requires 55 controls for any organization that's 500 or less employees to implement. And these are curated. We looked at best of the best, and we figured out what really works: prevention, detection, response, and recovery. So that's really what everybody's got to do, including the school board and others. They've got to now implement those controls, because if they had those controls, very unlikely they would have had this happen, because those controls would have blocked the attacker.
Sai, what role does AI play in this? We've all heard and seen the powers of these programs like ChatGPT. What role is AI having where this is concerned?
Well, one area that is quite concerning is it's kind of like the internet. The internet has such amazing, value that it provides us on a daily basis, how it's transformed our life. We can look up things immediately. We can get things immediately. We can be so much more smarter immediately. We can be so much more productive. So much value it provides. But then there's a dark side, how the bad guys can now use it and abuse it to come after us and cause us harm. So same thing with AI. AI has such value because it essentially can make us smarter to the next level. It can predict things. It can look up things even faster and quicker and deeper. It can calculate things. It can make things happen much faster. So whole host of value is there with AI, because basically it's simulating the human brain. Can never replace the human brain, but it can get pretty close. And it can do things just in an amazing way to help us make our life even enriched. So that's the good side. But then there's a dark side. And we're seeing that happen, where these bad guys are actually using AI to come in and do the attacks against us. So, for example, they've got AI now which can do these scans, in nanoseconds of, hundreds of websites, to go and look for certain vulnerabilities. So the attackers get in two ways. One is through the email, and they'll try to send you these phishing emails, try to fool you, and you happen to not pay attention and download malware therein, or from the web. They're going to scan your website, anything that's internet facing, look for bad code or gaps. Well, that takes a lot of time. That requires a bad guy to spend time looking at it. Well, now with AI, it can be done within seconds. So that's an example of AI, kind of like the internet, where there's a good side and there's a bad side.
It terrifies me, to be honest. I mean, it's not a world that I completely understand, right? Just listening to you talk about what these guys are doing and the speed at which they're doing it is just, it's mind-boggling to me. You talked about the idea that there's the ransomware guys and the guys who are trying to steal this information, sell it on the dark web. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the value in that is if these bad guys get a hold of these kind of private information, before you know it, there'll be a new credit card in Scott Sexsmith's name because they'll have all his ID. How prevalent is that? I mean, this must be just a $1 billion criminal operation, I assume.
Yes, it's pretty lucrative. These guys are making millions, and that's why they keep doing it. It's working and it's making them money. And so, unfortunately, these are professional criminal gangs. There's a whole industry. There's a training program that they provide. They recruit. Yeah, I mean, if you go on the dark web, you'll see these guys posting jobs. Look for wannabe hackers. There's these affiliate organizations. You can license the bad ransomware, as a service, pay them a cut. It's an unbelievable, business that's happening, multi-million-dollar. And so that's where, we have to all, as, Team Canada, take a few steps. We've got to implement the defense. We've got to be vigilant. The government's got to do their part, but every one of us has got to do their part. And that's why we came up with the standard, because it lays out, look, this is how a defense, should be in place at your organization. Here's how you do it. And so, like, for example, one of the controls is, scan your websites regularly, look for these vulnerabilities and patch them, eliminate them. Because if you do that, you're going to block the attacker. So there's 55 of these steps that these organizations should implement.
And where can they find that?
So they can find it at cybercatch.com under CIOC, or they can go to CIOstrategycouncil.com. CIO Strategy Council is the body that published the standard, with my help and a few other folks. And it's free. You can read it. It's a PDF. It'll lay out the 55 standards. But then you can go to cybercatch.com and sign up for a compliance manager. We've been partnering with CIO Strategy Council. We've got support from ISED. Because it's a one-stop shop. It's very affordable, so any organization can implement Compliance Manager and get into compliance, because we help them implement those 55 controls very quickly, and then we test those controls. So we use machine learning and AI to automate the testing of the control. So we'll look for anything that's broken, alert the organization, and help fix it. We'll test the employee to see if we can fool them via phishing emails before the attackers do. We'll scan from the outside. We'll go inside the network and look for anything that has passwords that are easily guessable. We'll crack it in seconds. We'll alert the business and go, guess what? We found this database with these passwords that can be used to go in there. Change it, fix it before the attackers get in. So that's how we keep the organizations compliant and secure.
Sorry to just go back to this school board hack, but it's an ongoing local story that a lot of people are interested in. Just a couple more questions. Are we to assume that the hackers were given something in order to give back some of this stuff? Because they've given staff and students assurances that they believe there's a low risk of this stuff being spread on the dark web, which means they must have gotten some assurances from the group that did this. What are we to assume from what we know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a challenge with the word assume, right? Always. So I think we need to probably wait a little bit and really ask questions, because one thinks that it will not be used because maybe the type of data that they have. But see, here's the thing. Even if they got pieces of a profile of a student or a faculty member, or a staff, that data still has value, and that can be used, with combination of other data. So, even if the attackers only got, let's say, name, address, and emails, for example, someone might think, well, they don't have passwords. Well, they don't have these other, personal information. So it's low risk. Well, no, not necessarily. They know the name, they know the email, they know the person. They can create a profile, and now they can go and find other data that they may have from other hacks. And in combination of that, now they've got what they're looking for. So, a lot of these are essentially stepping stones, so one cannot assume. And so what really has to do is, again, step back and go, how did this happen? And what can we do to prevent it? And what can we do to mitigate risk to everybody? So let's, take the proactive step in giving them monitoring, and because it could happen in 6 months, not necessarily now. It could happen in 3 months, where you might see the identity being stolen or the parents being impacted. I mean, think about especially schools. What kind of information they have, right? They've got basic stuff, but then they've got family counseling stuff. They've got special needs kids information. They've got medical information. They've got family background. I mean, whole host of very confidential, sensitive personal information. So schools in particular are big targets, and we're helping lots of them get secure and safe.
Yeah, I can imagine that it's a target that they would be going after, because they would assume that some of these are more vulnerable than they should be. You mentioned credit checks and credit monitoring. I know the local board here is saying we're going to give you 2 years. They're giving staff 2 years of free TransUnion monitoring. Is that enough, or should they be doing the Equifax as well? Like, what's enough, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's a step in the right direction, because that's the least one can do, because that does help. But really, the individuals have to be vigilant themselves. So, the school is given that, but you got to now know that your data is out there. So a first step that everybody's got to do is with passwords, like we talked about earlier. Take a look at your passwords, and know that you could now be abused and attacked somewhere else. So go change your passwords, make them passphrases, use a password manager, you think about using multi-factor authentication, and certainly do not reuse those passwords anywhere else. So, if the credit monitoring, that's just more for credit. What about passwords? What kind of other information, they may have had that you've got to now take, vigilance in? Who else is impacted in your family, perhaps? So those are the questions that people got to ask.
Sai, before we let you go today, what's the one piece of advice that you would give any business or any homeowner, for that fact, that they should be implementing?
Yes. So I would say, think about your business or your organization kind of like your home. Would you sleep at night without making sure all your windows and doors are shut, and making sure that you have some kind of monitoring, maybe a camera, but at least doors and windows shut, because if you don't, then what are you asking for? You're asking for trouble. The burglar's going to come in, shake some windows and doors and go, oh, look, there's a door open in the back. There's a window open. They're in, they're out. Same concept with your business, so you've got to have a good defense in place. So please implement the Canadian National Cybersecurity Standard and the controls with our help, and then test those controls, kind of like checking your doors and windows, because you are a potential target. And, you are digital. Don't think that you're not going to be attacked. No, everybody's potential targets, no matter how small you are, what you do. You could be a profit, non-for-profit, as we're seeing now. So please, let's Team Canada, let's go. Let's take it to the next level.
I like that. It's like a hockey analogy. Team Canada. We need some strong defense. And while you're surfing the web safely, another great site that you should check out is saihuda.com. I was on it today. It was wonderful. Sai, thank you for the insight, the perspective. Keep well. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Back to wrap on Inside the Village. I don't know about you, but after that conversation with Sai, my mind is blown.
The idea that there's I'm not a naive person, but this still boggles my mind that there's this dark web where, people are doing the worst possible things. And it's hackers for hire. You can get some training and you can work for the Iranians or the Russians, or the North Koreans. It's just wild. And this idea, and I don't know if we got into this, but this idea that these guys will get into your system and hang around for a while, for weeks, to see what they can exploit and what they can get, and then boom. And just the drama of waking up and realizing you're the victim of one of these kind of attacks, right? I know, again, the local school board here, they go to school and there's notes on the photocopier from the hackers saying basically your security sucks. We got in. Now you got to pay us. Yeah. And just the thought that must go through. Imagine we showed up to work and the whole place was shut down by that. It's just insane.
I loved his analogy of you wouldn't keep your windows open or unlocked or your back door open. That kind of resonated with me. That it's as simple as that. You wouldn't do it, at home. So why would you do it online?
For sure. And I think it's this idea too that just puts into focus how much we do online. How many times do you throw your credit card on a website, whether it's Amazon or whether it's to order your streaming subscription or whatever. It's all the time, right? And you're banking. I do bank online. It's all there, and you assume it's secure, you assume it's safe, but you just never know.
And you start by making sure your password isn't 1234.
That's right. And I'm going to change mine from Inside the Village to something else.
On that note, that's the show for this week. Thanks, pal. We'll talk to you next Wednesday.
Looking forward to it, buddy.
InsideTheVillage.ca. You can also find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts and, of course, across the Village Media Network. For Editor-in-Chief Michael Friscoletti, I'm Scott Sexsmith. We'll talk to you next week.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe, provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.